So we're talking about the law today. Now, in chapters 20 through 23 approximately is a long list of laws. So if you're ever bored on a Saturday morning and you want to go read some laws, you can go Exodus 20 to 23, and there's a long list. Now, there's many more, but in the book of Exodus, this is about the main section of laws given to the people. Do this, don't do this, don't do that, eat this, don't say that, a long list of rules. What I'd like for us to do today is look at the first 10. So some of you are familiar with those first 10. They're oftentimes called the 10 Commandments. Throw up a hand if you're familiar with the 10 Commandments. I imagine that I would get every hand because it is very well known. It may have been on your wall growing up in school or at church. People around the world that aren't even Christians, most of them, in fact, are at least familiar with the 10 Commandments. And this is Moses as they've come out into the wilderness, goes up to Mount Sinai to meet with God, and he receives this law, this code. And so I want us to walk through these 10 Commandments together. Now, right off the bat, you may be thinking, I've heard these, I'm good to go, I can tune out. And let me just ask you, let's not do that. Let's not do that. Let's pray that the Lord would have something new to say to us today, because what I want us to do is to hear these laws in the context of what's going on. All right, we talk about context a lot here as a church. You can read a scripture and really miss out on what's being said if you don't understand who it's being said to, when it's being said, why, the occasion, all that kind of stuff. So if we could, let's walk through the 10 Commandments. We'll do so somewhat quickly because there are 10. We'll walk through them, and I pray that the Lord has something to teach us today. So are we ready? Are we ready? There we go. Number one. You shall have no other gods before me. The first command. By the way, these are all in Exodus 20, if you want to follow along. I'm not going to read all of them as it's kind of spread out, but we're in Exodus 20. The first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me, or you might say besides me. You shall have no other gods before me. We hear this command and we think, sounds great. I don't even know any other gods. So yeah, you're first. You're the best. I want us to, again, think about who and when and why and where in this story. These people, these Israelites, have just come out of the land of Egypt, where there were hundreds of gods. God says, no, you shall have no other gods before me. God had just shown his dominance through the 10 plagues of dominating, showing his power and authority over all the gods of Egypt that they had worshipped and aspired to. You shall have no other gods before me. I imagine that at some point along the way, over the last 400 years in the land of Egypt under slavery, when they were not hearing from Yahweh, that there was a temptation at times to go, well, let me just check out some of these other gods. Can I get any type of power and authority and help from Ra or Osiris or Imhotep or any of these other Egyptian gods? They were familiar with them. They saw people practicing, worshiping them, attributing afterlife affairs to them, all sorts of things. And so this temptation is certainly before the people, and God knows it. And so he begins first and foremost, there will be no other gods before me. I will be first, I will be the most. This is going to be a significant foundation for our people. Right? As I've said before, the Israelites were considered weird, not because they worshiped God, but because they worshiped one God. This is what set them apart. No gods before me. This is God's rule. Now, if we could, I want us to just think about it in terms of the New Testament. If we flash forward, the Apostle Paul would have a similar ministry. Right? This is after the ministry, death, resurrection of Jesus. And the Apostle Paul is then sent into not Egypt, but the Greco-Roman world, where they also had all these other gods and goddesses that they worshipped. And the temptation for them oftentimes was to say, oh yeah, this Jesus guy, he sounds pretty cool. Let's just add him to the list. And Paul would say, no, Jesus is above all. He is Lord of lords, King of kings. Jesus is above all these. The same thing that's true in the New Testament with the Apostle Paul, with the Greeks and the Romans, is the truth of the first commandment here in the land of Egypt, in the wilderness with the Israelites. You shall have no other God before me. I am tops. Number one. Number two, you shall not make for yourself a carved image. This would be an idol. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or an idol. And again, I want us to think contextually. They've just come from the land of Egypt, where they had seen hundreds and thousands of idols, of carved images, with the head of a frog and the wings of an eagle and the head of a bull and the tail of a serpent and all sorts of idols and images for gods. And not just the land of Egypt, but all of the ancient Near Eastern world that they were somewhat familiar with or learning about had gods and had idols for those gods. It's just how the world worked. You didn't know what the God was like until you created in some fashion an idol for them. In fact, this was what caused some of the problem, I believe. When you fashion for yourself an idol of a God, in some ways you begin to think that you have a little bit of control over that God. What is that God like? Well, he's kind of like this. And when we fashion an idol of the God, and this is for Egypt and all these other Canaanites and Mesopotamians and early Near Eastern religions, you would fashion a God, and when they understood what the God was like, it would have to do a lot with who they were. Their own anxieties or their own aspirations, right? What they feared but what they wanted, they would heap that, project that upon God. So in essence, what you have is that people have created God in their own image. It's a reverse, where it says God has created us in His own image. So God says no idols. This is why God is known, Yahweh is known as the invisible God. It was very bizarre. Every other god and goddess, every other thing had an idol made to it that showed you what it looked like, what its personality was, what it was over in charge of. And Yahweh now says, no idols. Again, this will be a way that you stand apart, that you're different from where you've been, that you're different from the rest of the nations around you. But I think the beautiful thing in all this is that God says you shall not make for yourself idols, because God has already created image bearers, and that's you and that's me. Right? Genesis chapter 1. Right? Let us create mankind in our own image and after our own likeness. God has made image bearers. We are after His image, and He desires us to then live within the world and display His goodness and His character into the world around us. We are His images. We don't get to create others, because then we start to skew and try to control what God is like. Rather, He is the one that's in charge of us. He's establishing the correct order of things for this new group of people as they become a nation, as they move into the wilderness and eventually to the promised land. Number 2, you shall not make carved images. Number 3, how are we doing? Number 3, you shall not take the name of the Lord in vain. Man, I grew up hearing this a lot. Did y'all grow up hearing this? Don't take the Lord's name in vain. My kids still today, I got 2 kids right over here. If anyone says, "Oh my God," they will kind of look over at me like, "Dad, did you hear that? You need to go talk to them." It's not good. And this is what the idea of is taking the Lord's name in vain, saying, "Oh my God." Now, what I want to be clear on is that I agree, let's not do that haphazardly. So I'm not saying go on and say, well, don't be using Jesus Christ as some type of swear word response. But there's a deeper meaning also when it comes to taking the Lord's name in vain than just saying, "Oh my God." In fact, the real meaning and understanding of taking God's name in vain is to take God's name and to apply it to your agenda, to your will, to your kingdom, if you will, to your priorities. Well, I'm going to take God's name and I'm just going to put that for my plan, my will, my aspirations. That is to take His name in vain and to apply it to what you hope to do. And maybe God is not on board with what you're trying to say or do. Don't take my name in vain. Don't try to control me in some way. In fact, there's a New Testament example. There's a subtle example I want us to see. Maybe you've read this verse before and it's been a little confusing, but this is from the Sermon on the Mount. Which in fact, we're going to look at several passages from the Sermon on the Mount today. The first is Matthew chapter 5. This is Jesus' words, verse 36. He says, "And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say simply be yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil." Right? Maybe you've heard that before. I've read that before in the Sermon on the Mount, and it's always been slightly confusing. What's wrong with promising? Why can't I make an oath or swear? What's going on here? And I want us to see today it's a similar principle. Right? This word in the Sermon on the Mount Jesus gives in Matthew 5 says, listen, you are a human. You don't have the power in and of yourself to change anything. You can't make one hair turn from white to black or black to white. So when we want to ascribe our words and we want to make a vow, a promise, a swear, an oath, when we want to do that, what we're actually doing is trying to attach to it some other spiritual form, some other godly power. Whether we're saying it's God, Yahweh, or some other spirit or the universe or whatever, we're trying to attach to our words God's authority. By the name of God, this will happen, right? We try to attach His word to our word. We try to attach Him to our promise. And he says, when you try to do that and pull from the spiritual realm to attach it to your words, that becomes an evil thing. So don't swear, don't promise in that way, don't make an oath in that way. Rather, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Otherwise, you're trying to, again, control God by putting His words into your own thoughts and ideas. And Jesus warns us against this. May we not take the name of the Lord in vain. Don't attach His words to our own. The Israelites had seen this take place in Egypt, where they said, in the name of Ra, this is what he says. And it's like, well, was that your word or was that His word? And they were always trying to attribute the power of the gods into their own agenda, their own plan, their own procedures, their own kingdom. Number 4, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. This would be another example of the people being set apart. Right? The word holy in the Bible, that means set apart. And He wanted His people to be holy, to be set apart from the rest of the nations, that they might represent God to them. And this is something that they learned from God, because it tells us that in creation, God would rest on the last day, on the seventh day. For 6 days He worked, and on the seventh He rested, not because He needed it, but because He was modeling it for us, His image bearers, as we would then model Him to the world. Again, the priority working its way down from God to us, through us to the world. God is modeling this for the people. And so the people now have to understand this principle. We've talked about the Sabbath a little bit before. This is something that helps form us, to shape us in God's likeness. We could accomplish more if we worked that extra day. All the other nations are doing it. And God says, I don't want you to make an idol out of productivity. I don't want you to make an idol out of what you can accomplish on your own. Rather, I can accomplish more through you if you listen and trust and obey. And we got to trust God to provide in the meantime, in the gap, in that last day of rest. But here's what I love to think about too. Again, who is this group that is receiving this? This is a people that have been slaves for 400 years. I don't imagine they had many days off as slaves. They had heavy burdens on their back. So above everything else, the formation that comes with it and the principle behind it, that we need this day of rest to just soak it in and experience God and not do, but just be. On top of all that, this is a gift that God gives the people. Hey, take a day off every week, God says. Can I get an amen on that? Yeah, we get 2 days off a week usually. They started with 1, and that's a good beginning. This group of slaves that had worked so hard, this is now a picture of God's kindness and compassion. Hey, why don't you work hard, but then why don't you stop? Put the tools down, put the farming equipment down, and rest. Just rest. This was a gift. Sometimes we can forget. The Sabbath is a gift. It was a gift to them, and it is in fact a gift to us. To slow down, to take a breath, and to rest. God desires it for us, just like He did for them. Number 5. Still doing good? Yeah. Number 5. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land God is giving to you. This was the command I heard most growing up, primarily from my mom and my dad. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that God is giving to you, is what it says. And I heard this all the time. Honor your parents. Hey, the 5th commandment. Honor your parents. A good way to remember it is you hold up your hand, number 5. It's the 5th commandment. Where'd you get your hand from? Parents. So then you can remember that one. All right, y'all got that? You always remember the 5th commandment. Honor your father and your mother. Number 5. That your days may be long in the land God is giving to you. Now, I want us to understand what's actually being said here. What's the point of this? Because I always heard that, hey, honor your parents, and this is the first commandment with a promise that you'll live to be old. Your days will be long. right? So honor your parents and you might live to be an old man. Now, I don't want to dismiss that, but here's what's going on. Here's what's actually going on. God understands how things work. Of course, He is the creator. He has a new group of people, this family that's grown into a nation, that is about to embark on another adventure. 40 years in the wilderness and then a season of time in the promised land and all sorts of stuff leading up into Jesus. This new group of people, this new nation, if they're going to last, if they're going to make it longer than 1 or 2 or 3 generations, they're going to have to honor their parents. Meaning, listen to their parents as they tell them the stories of Yahweh, of His faithfulness, of His covenant promise, of His miraculous signs and wonders. Listen to and therefore honor your parents in that way, because quickly we can forget and turn aside. God knows that this is typically, primarily, how things are handed down from generation to generation is through the family. From parents to children, from fathers to sons, from mothers to daughters, handed down. In the same way I listened to my parents, and now here I am. I pray that I'm raising up my kids to understand and know Jesus, that when they grow up, they could do the same for their kids. This is how it's worked, and this is God's design. This is not an accident. Right? And if someone begins to turn away, it makes a bigger impact than just on me. It takes an impact on whatever's after me. God knows this. If my parents raised me in the church and all this stuff, and I said, screw that, I don't want to do anything with the church, I hate Jesus, I'm not about it, and I stopped it, well, guess who that would affect? Me, but now also my kids, and their kids, and their kids. God understands that to last long in the land, that your days may be long in the land, means that generationally it is being passed down of the faithfulness of God. That's the promise that comes with it. And it's by God's design. In fact, there's a sad example that takes place just after this story. You have the generation of Moses, then you have his successor Joshua, and that through the story of Joshua, they move into the promised land, and this gets us into the book of Joshua, then the book of Judges in our Bible, the next 2 books after the first 5. In Judges chapter 2, verse 10, I would say one of the saddest verses in the Bible. Judges chapter 2, verse 10 says this, "And all that generation," that's of Joshua, "also were gathered to their fathers," meaning they died, "and there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that He had done for Israel." That's just sad. Think of all the stuff God had done. The miraculous wonders through the 10 plagues of freeing the children of Israel, the parting of the Red Sea, the provision of manna in the wilderness, and all these things that God did. And then it says Moses, then Joshua, and then the next generation didn't know about it. They didn't hear about it. They turned, they did not honor their father and their mother that their days might be long in the land. And the people would go through many trials moving forward because of that. Might we be a people that honor our parents as we listen to them? And maybe if it's your scenario, you need to start that process and begin with your own kids and move it forward. Maybe you weren't blessed to have parents that were in church following Jesus. That's okay. But you can begin it. You can start it. And maybe that's where your calling is today. Number six, you shall not murder. These next few are kind of straightforward. You shall not murder. Now, the word there means murder. It does not just mean to kill. It does include to kill in negligence. We cannot just be negligent and haphazard and that lead to someone's death, that we didn't officially murder them, we killed them in negligence. That is included. But the law here says do not murder. And again, this is not a new idea. This is not a new idea even for them. But this is to help bring about order into their society, order as a people. Because here's the truth of the matter. When someone was to do something to you, there's going to be many laws that God's about to give the people to address all sorts of things. And a lot of these laws that you can read in Exodus and Leviticus and these other books, a lot of these laws have punishment attached to it. And a lot of, in fact, that punishment is death in the Scriptures. Now, I do think that the Bible, and this is on a journey that leads us to Jesus, something we've talked about, but in the law, there are punishments of death. If you do this thing, then you shall be killed. So this law is not taking away death. It's not taking away killing in that sense. But here's the way that the order comes. If someone does something to you, it doesn't mean that you ought to just kill them back. I'll take care of it. No, there's a proper system of governance, of structure, of order. And you can critique the system. They could have, and we can too. But there's a proper system of governance and order where they're going to go through that system. You don't get to take matters into your own hands. That would then constitute as murder in that way. So don't take it into your own hands. Let the system cover it and let the system work its way. That's what Paul would address in Romans 13 with the government of listening to the authorities, that it might properly punish bad behavior and negative things that turn society in the wrong direction. Now, here's what I'd love to say, and I debated whether or not to say it, but I pray you hear this the right way. I believe today in America, there's a big problem with too many people having the power of life and death in their hands at any moment. Now, I've said this before. Please don't hear this the wrong way. I'm not trying to come take everyone's guns away. I'm not trying to do that. I do think we do have more guns in the country than we have people. I do think in some ways as a culture we worship or idolize that idea of power that's presented in a weapon. It's also recreational and fun. I get all this. But so many people have the power of life and death in their hands, and I don't know if it was intended for us to have that power in such a quick way. Let the authorities take hold of something if need be. I don't need to have that power myself. The sad news is I've seen videos, and so have you, of someone pulling out a gun and killing someone because of a road rage incident, because of a traffic stop gone wrong. And it's like, imagine that for the rest of their life, they're wishing I had not done that thing in my anger, but yet they had the power in their hands. And this law is addressing this idea. Do not murder. Do not take this into your own hands. Do not put yourself in the place of God. God has the power of life and death. May we not take it for ourselves so haphazardly. That is the warning. Number 7. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not commit adultery. Now, here's the truth that God is trying to bring to the people. Because this one, you could say, stands apart a little bit. It's a moral thing. We have many of these laws that work with all these. But adultery is one, of course, we don't have that law here. Modern times for us. You can commit adultery, and I would say it's a sin. It's frowned upon. It's no good. There's consequences. But you're not going to get thrown into jail for committing adultery. But God gives them this rule, this law, this command for an important reason. God knows the truth that the way in which they are faithful to one another is the way in which they will be faithful to me. And the inverse is true. The way in which they are faithful to me, God, is the way in which they will be faithful to one another. They work reflexively in that way. And God knows that they're about to embark on a difficult, challenging, long and winding and turning adventure together with many ups and downs, and He needs this people to stay faithful to Him, their Father, their God, Yahweh. And if they're unable to be faithful to the people here, especially a spouse, then they're going to have a hard time being faithful to God, Yahweh. Right? John would say this in his book. I don't have the scripture on the screen, but he would say, it's difficult to love God whom you cannot see when you can love the people that you can see. Right? It's harder to love a God who you can't see than it is to love the people who you can see right here in front of you. That's in 1 John. The same is true. If we're not going to be able to be faithful to a spouse, then we're not going to be able to be faithful to God. He understands the implications. Right? The Apostle Paul would say it this way in the New Testament. He addresses this in the reign of Christ and the church. He says it in Ephesians 5. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. He's quoting Genesis. Verse 32, this mystery is profound, and I'm saying that it refers to Christ and the church. There's this picture, I've read this at many weddings before, there's a picture of, okay, the way in which you are faithful in your marriage is how in which you will be faithful to God. Now, understand that we are fallen beings, that we struggle, that marriages have a lot of issues going on, and I'm not trying to say that anyone needs to stay in a marriage that is unsafe for you. Please don't hear that. But the picture of marriage is that in this covenant faithfulness promise to one another, where you love and forgive and serve one another, that is the picture of Christ and the church. And in the same way here about committing adultery, that is the picture of how you will be faithful to your spouse. Therefore, you will be faithful to God, Yahweh, as you walk forward in life together. That's why it's listed as a law. Now, Jesus, I'm not going to read this verse either, but Jesus would address this in a further way. Jesus brings up divorce in the New Testament. It's one of those like touchy, like hard to understand verses, but he talks about divorce. But again, here's the context. It's actually from this command. The men would say, well, I can't commit adultery, so I'll just divorce my wife so I can go over here to this woman next. I've gotten everything I can get out of this woman, so I'll divorce her now and move on to the next. That was their loophole, their way around. And that's why Jesus calls out and says, no, you can't get divorced for whatever reason you want. Here's the stipulations. That's the reason behind it. It's because the men, typically the men are the problem, the men would try to go around the law to achieve what they wanted, and Jesus calls it out. That's the purpose behind the statement of divorce. It comes from this command. Number 8. Still doing good? I don't know why I'm looking like at Chris every time I ask that. You gave me the best answer the first time. So, number 8, you shall not steal. Again, straightforward. You shall not steal. How can we be a people if we're unable to respect one another? And if I'm going to take your stuff, then I don't respect you. I don't value you. In fact, I place myself above you. I am more important. My needs are more important. This is, of course, counter to everything we learn about God revealed in Christ, where we are to humble ourselves, be less than someone else, consider their needs more important than our own. When you steal from them, you're putting you above them, and your needs above their needs, and your wants and desires above theirs. A society cannot handle itself, cannot establish itself, cannot make it if there's not a respect for people's stuff. Do not steal anyone's things. But in fact, I believe there's also a deeper layer to this one as well. It's not just the stuff. Though it is the stuff, it's not just the stuff. These people had come out from the land of Egypt for 400 years as slaves. Think about what had been stolen from them. Their very lives had been stolen. Their time, their freedom, right? Their own livelihood has been stolen as they were subjugated to perform as slaves and serve a higher master. Their lives were stolen. And so in some way when it says do not steal, yes, it's the stuff, but do not steal anyone's time, anyone's life, anyone's freedom. Do not subjugate them in that way to steal from them the gift of life that God has given them. Do not subjugate someone down. It's a warning against slavery, by the way. It's a warning. Do not steal anyone's time, anyone's life, anyone's freedom. Do not steal. Number 9. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Similarly to you shall not lie, but it specifically refers to bearing a false witness against your neighbor. How can you be a society that stands, right, if you cannot trust your word? There's a lot of laws and rules from these 10 to the rest in the Old Testament to our own laws in America that have this assumption of this moral standing where I'm going to be honest with myself and with the reality of the situation. If you're unable to be honest, if you're unable to have a true and believable witness about what's going on, then your society will crumble. Right? Your society will crumble if you're unable to have a true and honest word. Don't slander, don't talk down to people around you. Don't accuse someone of something when it's not true. Because these accounts, these testimonies then lead to the punishments that have consequences. So be confident in what you're saying is true. Number 10, last one, number 10. You shall not covet your neighbor's house or wife, etc. I'll put etc. There's a longer list. Male and female servant, donkey, oxen. Do not covet your neighbor's things. Do not covet your neighbor's things. I always thought this was the most odd of the 10 Commandments. It seemed like all the rest are pretty serious things. Don't do those things that make sense. Worship God, don't have idols, don't kill anyone. Okay, got that. And then number 10 was always like, don't kind of want your neighbor's stuff. It's like, man, it seems less than to me, or it did. In fact, growing up, this is just a funny side note. The pastor would always say, we covet your prayers. You ever heard that phrase? We covet your prayers for this thing. And I was always like, hold on, why are you breaking the 10th commandment to get prayers? But they always said, we covet your prayers. I just thought of that randomly. That's nowhere in my notes. Coveting. to desire your neighbor's things. God is trying to establish a people that are going to last. We must trust God. This is about provision. If we cannot trust God to provide for us all that we need, and we're looking elsewhere for provision, quickly we will turn from looking to our neighbor's stuff for what we need to looking to another God for what we need. That's the journey that takes you on. So I need you to trust that God is going to provide for you everything that you need, and do not look elsewhere. Do not constantly be dissatisfied and not content with the gift of life God has given you. Think of the amazing gift these people had, being saved from slavery, and now here they are. And how quickly did the people begin to grumble? We don't even have any good food out here in the wilderness. We should have just stayed as slaves. They grumbled rather quickly. And God is saying, I need you to be content and I need you to trust me. And the truth is that when we covet, it actually leads to these previous few we just mentioned. It is coveting and desiring something that's not yours that often leads to murder and to stealing and to lying and to adultery. It is coveting that leads to those things of desiring something that's not yours, leads you to actually act on it. So the 10th commandment is a guardrail for the previous 4. Don't do these things that go against God's provision for you and your life. All right, everyone take a big breath in. Let it out. There's the 10 commandments. So how do we see Jesus in these? Remember, that's our series. How do we find Jesus in, yes, these 10, but also in the rest of the law? There are 603 more laws. We're not going to go through those. 613 altogether. There's all these laws. How do we see Jesus in them? There's a few ways I want us to talk about as we wrap up today. First, I want us to take a look at Matthew chapter 5, back to the Sermon on the Mount, verse 17. Matthew 5:17. Jesus says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." This is a significant verse. This is important. We cannot say, oh, we're a church that loves Jesus. Let's just rip out our Old Testament and throw that in the trash. We don't need that. No. Jesus says, I have not come to abolish, to get rid of the law or the prophets, which, by the way, would just reiterate the law, remind the people what the law was. I have not come to abolish that, but to fulfill that. I want us to think about the law that God has given the people, all these rules and lists of do's and don'ts, as a structure, right? As a structure that gives itself a basin of structure, parameters and rules. It gives structure to your life. Don't go past these edges, right? If you think about a large basin, if I were to pour water in it, it would hold in the basin. If the basin wasn't there and I poured water, it would go where? Just wherever. It would splash and go anywhere. But an item that gives it structure, parameters, and outside walls and lines, don't go past here, don't go past there, that's a structure that's needed. Jesus would say, I've come to fulfill the law. But hear it this way, I've come to fill the law. Jesus fills this structure of the law with himself. He fills the law. He gives the purpose behind it, the heart behind it, the intent that it's always going after, that this parameters gives you. Jesus fills it with himself. It's great to have a basin, and there it is, and it's decorative, and here's a basin, but it actually doesn't serve any purpose until it is filled. Oh, this is what it's for. This is now giving it the purpose that it was intended to have, that it might mean something in our hearts. Jesus doesn't want to get rid of the basin, get rid of the structure. He wants to fill it and show us the true intent behind it. Now, I think there's 2 primary ways Jesus helps fulfill the law. The first, I want us to think about this. Jesus, in fact, makes the law more challenging. Right? I love Jesus, and sometimes it's like, oh, Jesus is super cool, and he's chill, and he's just going to forgive you, and he ain't mad, and I get all that, and I'm on board with that. But Jesus actually makes the law more challenging than they had it in the Old Testament, because he makes it about the heart. He makes it a real thing. Right? Let me just read 2 quick examples. These are things you've probably heard before. Matthew 5, verse 21 and 22. Jesus says, "You have heard it said to those of old," that's the law, "you shall not murder." That's the commandment. and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to the judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the hell of fire. These are Jesus' words, right? He says, hey, I know the law says do not murder, but in fact, I say do not hate. Now for me, have I ever murdered anyone? No, praise the Lord, I have not. Have I ever hated someone? Sadly, yes, I have. And this is the thing Jesus talks about. It's about the heart of the matter. The next example, verse 27, says, you have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery, another one of the laws. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. I've never committed adultery, thank the Lord. Have I ever looked at a woman with lustful intent in my heart? Yes. Jesus takes the law, he ups it. Because it's not just any longer about a list of things not to do. The purpose of the law is not to just keep you from doing certain things. That's not the purpose. Now that's written in there to keep you, to protect you, but it's not the point of it. The point of the law is not to keep you from doing these things. The point of the law is to form and to shape your heart. Because that's what, as we've talked about many times, that's what God cares about. Who you really are. When I say your heart, I mean who you really are. You can pretend all day long to be righteous. You cannot do certain things just because they're not even socially acceptable and you don't want to receive the condemnation that comes from them. But if your heart is rotten from the inside, then those things that you're abstaining from don't really matter in the long run. It's not about the things, it's about your heart. You can pretend to be righteous, but you cannot pretend with your heart before God. He knows you inside and out. I don't want that to scare you. I want that to just open your eyes a little bit. God knows you fully. He knows you fully, and He cares about you fully, and He wants your heart to be shaped like His. The second thing Jesus says, this is from Matthew 22, I think 22. Matthew 22. This is a verse we've read many times. Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? And he said to him, Jesus said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all of the law and the prophets. I know you've likely heard that before. You've probably heard it here before. The teacher asks Jesus, this scribe, this Pharisee likely asks Jesus, hey, what's the great commandment? And Jesus doesn't just answer with one, He gives two. Jesus is always about attaching these together, not separating them. Right? As we talked about before, I think that was the first temptation of Christ. Just make your ministry about people and provision. Don't worry about the worship. That was to separate these out. Jesus is about combining these together, the love of God and the love of neighbor. He says, hey, love the Lord your God with all you got, with all your heart, soul, mind, strength. But He doesn't end there. He says the second is like it, is like the first, to love your neighbor as yourself. These two things fulfill all of the law and the prophets, all of the rules and the laws God had given the people. To fulfill them is to simply love. To simply love. And you may say, oh, that's easier. Well, have you met anyone else? It's not always easy to love. Everyone had someone come to mind. It can be hard. It can be very hard to love. But that is the purpose of the structure, of the rules, of the laws, that it would lead us to a place of love, both for God and for one another. The Apostle Paul says it this way, similar thing. Book of Romans. We're almost done. How are we doing? Paul says this, Romans chapter 13, verse 8. Owe no one anything except to love each other. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law. Paul is reiterating the same point. He zooms in on our love for neighbor in this instance, and it says, if we just love people well, if we love with patience and kindness and goodness, if we love the way Paul described in Romans 13 that you hear read at weddings, if we love in this way, the way that Jesus has shown us, right, that was his command he gave at the table, right? Love one another as I have loved you. If we love people that way, that is to fulfill the law. That covers the law. That is the point of the law. In fact, here's the challenge for us today. If we ever see a law and we're following a rule, whether it's one of these or another one you have in your life, if you are following a rule and it leads you to be less loving, then you've missed the point of the law. If you're ever following a law and it leads you to be less loving of one another, your neighbor and your enemy and everyone in between, if any law leads you to be less loving, then you have missed the whole point of the law. Because the law is fulfilled, as Jesus and the Apostle Paul tell us, by our love, both for God and one another. If a law leads us to not love, we've missed the point. And I want to end with this story. Jesus in his ministry many times would step over the line a little bit, and it would irritate the people who loved the law, the Pharisees, the scribes, the Sadducees. He would step over the line a little bit to try to teach them something. One of the laws, for instance, that we read earlier, the fourth, not the fifth, the fourth, honor the Sabbath. Honor the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And so the question is, what does that mean? Okay, got it, God, I'll keep it holy. What do I have to do to keep it holy? Right? This is where the oral tradition began to work its way into the lives of the Jewish people. Okay, God said keep it holy. Well, what does that mean? What do I do? What work can I do and what can I not do? What does it mean to keep it holy? This is where the people had to then extrapolate and work from the scriptures to understand what the actual rules were. And they had all this list of rules of what you could do. Jesus in his ministry a few different times, he would walk through the field with his disciples and he would pluck some grain, roll it in his fingers to have a snack. He was not supposed to do that according to the rules. Jesus would heal several people on the Sabbath, which again, Jesus doesn't accidentally do this. He intentionally heals people on the Sabbath in a way that upsets the Pharisees. What are you doing, Jesus? You're supposed to rest. You're supposed to rest. This is the rule that God gave us. And Jesus is trying to teach them something about the purpose of the law. The law is to lead and form and shape and guide them to be more loving. And if it leads them to say, hey, I'd love to help you, pal, but it's the Sabbath. Hey, I'd love to help get your ox out of the ditch. I'd love to help you move to a new home. I'd love to help provide for you in some way, but it's the Sabbath, so I can't. Is to take the law and to lead you to a place where you're not loving well. And Jesus says, no thanks. That's not the purpose of the law. That's not the point of it. He fills it with himself, and God is love, so he's filling it with love, that our love might come through. And at one point when he was confronted, Jesus, here's our last verse for today, Mark chapter 2, Jesus says this. Verse 27, and he, Jesus, said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man, that's Jesus, is Lord even of the Sabbath. He says this rule that we have, right? We weren't made for the rule. The rule was made for us. Again, that it might shape us and form us. And if we want to use the rule as an excuse to not love people well, then we've missed the point of it. No, the rule was made for us, to slow us down, to calm us down, to align us with God, to see it as a gift where we can breathe and exhale. But it is not intended to keep us from loving. You could say a similar thing about all the laws. It is not us for them, it is them for us, to give us structure that we then fill with Christ so we might love well. So I pray for you, I pray for our church as we interact with the law, as you work your way through the law and many times throughout the Old Testament, to understand the purpose behind them is to lead the people, to lead us, to be those who love people well. The love that Christ has shown us. And if ever we feel like a law has led us to be less loving, then we need to back up and reevaluate that we might love well. That's how we see Jesus in the law. Amen? All right, amen.